Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So we have our Scottish Government Industry Insights event today. This is one of our series of events with employers looking into different industries and learning about each industry and how to get our jobs, jobs for graduates and students, part-time internships, placements, etc. So we have 4 speakers today. So John Clements, Assistant Statistician, and Rachel McQueen, Policy Officer, and Nadine, Social Researcher, and Anna, Research Officer. So John, I think you are sharing your screen, so I'm assuming you are going to speak first, and this I'll transfer my microphone to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to be here and to be talking to you today a little bit about what we do and how we've kind of came on our own various individual journeys. I'll say a little bit about who we are. So myself, Nadine, Rachel and Anna all work for the Scottish Government. As I said, I'm a statistician. Nadine and Anna work in social research and Rachel's working in a policy role. So we've all been on quite different journeys to get to the points that we're at, and we're here to talk a little bit about that journey and what our roles involve in terms of kind of what we do in the day-to-day within the Scottish Government. So in terms of the format of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to each talk about where we started off, how we've reached where we are currently, and the sort of a journey we had along the way. The 4 of us will kind of do a session each on kind of about our individual stories, and we're aiming to do about 40 minutes going through that, and then we'll leave a bit of time at the end for your questions, which, to be perfectly honest, is one of the most important part of all of this. So if you have any questions at any point anyway through this, if you can kind of keep them for the end, and we'll open the floor up for any questions. And if you want to use the chat bar to kind of put your questions in the meantime, we can pick any questions that you have been through up at the end. So I think that kind of covers sort of a format and what we're going to talk about. I will hand over to our social research component to take us off. So Nadine, if you're wanting to say a little bit about, oh no, sorry, Anna.
Hi, yes. So I am a new start social researcher in the Scottish Government. So this is my first graduate job, essentially straight out of my master's. In terms of my research background, I actually really specialized in history, although I did always do a kind of interdisciplinary thing. So I did, history and politics in my undergraduate, and then I did history of migration in my master's, but that was very interdisciplinary, and we did elements of public policy, urban planning, all sorts of stuff. So some of my formal training has been very directly related to what I do now, but some also has not, so it's not to say that to get into the Scottish Government, you have to just constantly be researching policy. It's definitely a good idea to explore your academic interests and your passions, keep looking at things that interest you, because that's when you're thinking most creatively, and that's when you're making the best use of your research capabilities. But do always have, in the back burner, if this is a career path that interests you, thinking about building a strong foundation in research methods, right? So if we could go to the next slide, please, John. Yeah, so in terms of my work experience, prior to working in the Scottish Government, again, very varied. I've done side jobs throughout university. So I've taught Pilates for 8 years, and I've also worked in hospitality. And then I did stuff that was very history related. I worked in archives, I worked in the National Archives, I worked in the Guardian's archives, which was actually really crazy. That was a really fun experience. I got to touch the Snowden hard drives, they have them in a vault. They have them in a box in the vault. I got to touch them. So yeah, so again, your work experience doesn't have to be directly related to government work. But one of the most valuable experiences that I got in terms of getting this job were research experiences, even though they were research in completely different areas. So I did a project with teaching computers to read handwriting. And that was something that I talked about in my interview for this job. So again, it's about, thinking about how can you communicate the transferable skills that you have gained from an area that might not be immediately related, but, will equip you well for this future role. And that's definitely something that that the career service could help you out with. So, you know, chat with them about how to sort of market those experiences. If we could go to the next slide, please, John. Thank you. Yeah, so my route into Scottish government, honestly, this is a job that I have been wanting to do for a long time. I like public policy research. I like research which has, you know, an impact. So I spent quite a lot of time talking to people who worked in Scottish government and asking them, especially as I went into my master's, which was a 2-year program, you know, what kind of courses are going to be useful, right? So one of the strongest bits of advice that I got was take quantitative method courses, right? It doesn't mean you have to be a statistician, but it is good to have a basic understanding of how stats work, you know, even as a social researcher. And you'll find I'm doing this now. So I was hired as a fixed term appointment, which means, you know, I'm initially on like a 6-month contract. And then for that hiring process, you send in a CV and then you do an interview. But for the permanent hiring process, which is like once or maybe twice a year, it's a much longer process, and you have to take an exam to be a social researcher on a permanent basis. And that exam a lot of it is based on quantitative methods. So it's a good idea to have this foundation in understanding how quant methods work. Yeah. So that was my route in. And then, yeah, next slide, please, John, if that's all right. So just in terms of my first impressions of government work, some of the downsides is that, you know, there is a very significant civil service language barrier. So you'll find this in government. There's a lot of use of acronyms to the point where, you know, the acronyms like don't make sense from department to department because everyone has their own different sets of acronyms. So that can be disorienting. And also, you know, starting a new job digitally is disorienting as well. And there were some holdups in HR with my security clearance because they wanted me to get criminal background checks in all the countries that I had lived, which was complicated. But now that I'm in, you know, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. I really like that there is a fast turnover in research projects. So unlike in academia where you can end up spending several years on just one thing, you know, you have your chance to try your hand at lots of different things. You also have a lot more support than I found in academic spheres, in that you're not generally working alone, you're generally working in teams, which is something that was certainly lacking in my discipline. I know it's not so much the case in like STEM subjects where you work in labs and such, but at least in the humanities and the social sciences, I always found that I was working by myself. So it is nice to be working as part of a team. Another really cool thing is that there is lots of support and funding for further training. So if you want to take a course in statistical methods, or you want to learn how to use Python, or you want to, you know, do all of this stuff, the Scottish government will pay for you to do that. And they will pay for you to do that even if you're on a fixed term contract. So even if you're not a permanent employee. So it's a great way of building up, you know, skills that will be valuable in this or any other career really that you might think to turn to. So that's my sort of resume of how I got here and what it's like now.
Thanks very much, Anna. And I think we will jump over to our other social researcher. Over to you, Nadine.
Hello. Yes, nice to meet you all. I was really heartened by the number of people who were putting in the chat about their degrees being kind of integrated degrees or combined degrees, and that's quite similar to my experience. My first degree was in human sciences. My mum described it as being all the ologies, but basically I couldn't decide between sciences and arts, and could see value in them both. And I would say for those of you who are doing those type of combined degrees, it really sets you up well if you're interested in having a career in government, because you're able to see kind of social things from multiple different angles, from different perspectives. And that's really important to be able to see the interconnections of disciplines. Although I've been on a bit of a circular route to get to where I am now, and a bit like Anna, would just emphasize that any kind of work experience, whatever it is, there are transferable skills that are so important for government. So once I finished my degree, I actually worked as a science teacher for 2 years in the Northeast. And And I would say from that, things like leadership and communication skills, it's really important in government to be able to communicate things in plain English, even though, like Anna said, sometimes we like to throw in some acronyms as well. So those types of skills. Then after that, personal circumstances brought me to Scotland, where I had to register to be a teacher, but in the meantime also needed to make money. So ended up working for the Red Cross for some time. And that was, I learned huge amounts from that, just in terms of teamwork and also putting policy into practice, kind of social care policy, which I was really interested in anyway. And that then prompted me, seeing that connection between policy and practice led me to apply for a PhD at the University of Stirling. And as part of that, some of you might be familiar with the Scottish Graduate School of Social Sciences, but they offer 1+3 degrees. So you have a master's as part of a PhD. So I did a master's in applied social research methods. And as Anna was speaking about earlier, having those kind of skills are particularly set you in good stead for applying for a social research position, being able to demonstrate those kind of quantitative and qualitative skills. And the bottom right hand side, I looked up some icons for PhD, and all the things that they were showing online were lots of graduation hats. And I was thinking that's only a small part of doing a PhD. Most of it is sitting quite lonely with a laptop, in my experience. But in terms of the transferable skills, as well as research, also project management skills, whenever you're taking a research project from start to finish, is something that you do a lot of in government social research. So a PhD really helped for that. And then moving on to the next slide, please, John Michael. My specific route into government was as part of that 1+3 PhD with the Scottish Graduate School of Social Sciences, and they offer a 3-month internship. And that can be in various different organisations, or they also offer it with Scottish Government. And at that stage, I was interested in research, but kind of thought research only took place in universities. I hadn't really considered other types of organisations, for instance, the government, where research is really, really important, and thoroughly enjoyed the 3 months. So much so that I then applied for the government, the social research fast stream. And as part of that, you can rotate about once a year or every year and a half to try out different roles or different kind of parts of government, but as a social researcher. So Anna mentioned fixed term appointments. So the fast stream is one route, fixed term appointments, or there are recruitment boards. Apologies about the noise there. And so far I've been in for 2 years and have worked for the Office of the Chief Researcher. During COVID, I got moved to work in the Coronavirus Hub, which was absolutely fascinating, looking at social attitudes data and compliance and kind of reporting to ministers on behavioural trends throughout the COVID pandemic. So a big plus is being able to take research, but then to use it to influence decision making as well. So it feels a real privilege to be able to do that. And it's worth mentioning that as a social researcher, just on entrance, whatever route that you take with it into social research, you do a short test that kind of looks at your skills, social research skills, and that allows you to become a member of the government social research service, and that's a UK-wide service, and the Scottish Government is part of that. And yet finally, John Michael, just if you wouldn't mind moving it to the next slide. They're really similar. My highlights and lowlights are quite similar to Anna's. First of all, in terms of creating impactful research, like I said, using it to influence decision making. The experience of being able to try new things. I've been able to try qualitative research, quantitative research, both carrying out research, but also project managing, procuring it, and working with suppliers to carry out research too. In Scottish Government, they're full of fantastic supportive colleagues who really embrace trying new things. Our Chief Social Researcher, Audrey, is very promotive of creative methods and just new ways of communicating research as well. And also I would say a big plus is having colleagues with unknown talents. There's a lot of talented people in Scottish Government, and for instance, during my time in the COVID hub, one of the scientists who was involved in lots of the COVID modelling, her background was a PhD in potato virology, and you always find out bits about your colleagues who, yeah, they're experts in all sorts of areas, but are still managing to kind of apply that learning to new situations and things. But one ongoing challenge is just getting up to speed with things quickly. Anna spoke earlier about pace, and compared to academia, it is a lot more fast paced. And particularly once you're in government, many people move around. So getting up to speed with a new work area can be challenging. And then finally, just a few things to plug with social research. If you are interested, obviously Anna and I would be very happy to answer questions specifically about being a social researcher, but there's other ways you can find out information. For instance, the Government Social Research has a website, and you can find out more about placements, about the fast stream, and just generally about what being a social researcher involves. There's also an analytical seminar series, which is open to everyone. And the next one of that is on the 30th of November. And that's about inclusive communication, which we can forward you on details if you'd like to learn more. And then finally, there's the contact details there for if you'd like to get in touch with the administration. As Anna said, you can send in your CV, and if you are getting towards the end of your undergraduate and something that you'd consider doing, there's a bank of CVs that whenever there's appointments, we can look through and find someone who's suitable as well. And yeah, and that the website at the bottom there, the Work for Scotland, that's where we advertise the kind of annual recruitment boards, and that's open to everyone to apply. So keep your eyes peeled for whenever they will be coming to you. As I say, please do ask us questions at the end if there's anything more specific you'd like to know. And John Michael, I'll hand back to you.
Great, thanks very much, Nadine. And I can confirm, and I'm not biased at all, that the social researchers are generally a pretty fantastic bunch, actually without exception, I think about it. And that's not just me saying that because I need to work with them. So I think it's on to my section now. So my role within the Scottish Government is in statistics, and I work as an assistant statistician within the same team as Nadine, funnily enough. So my background is in psychology. I didn't start off doing psychology. I actually went to uni with the intention of becoming an English teacher. Didn't quite enjoy studying English, and I kind of made my way into studying psychology. Quite enjoyed it and was quite good at it, which felt like quite a good indication that it was probably something I wanted to stick with for a while. And thinking back, I think doing psychology has definitely been a big advantage in terms of kind of getting me to where I am today, I suppose, on the journey of things. The sort of a broad range of topics that you can cover in psychology and the wide variety of research methods that you can cover is a definite strength. Downside, probably thinking back, as was mentioned earlier, the sort of a quantitative statistics side of it's quite a small portion of the overall course. So that can be, I think that was something that at the time I probably wish I'd paid a little bit more attention to and had a bit more of a stronger background on, because it's certainly something that down the road I've had to kind of build up a little bit in my own time to really understand what's going on. So I did my undergraduate degree at Strathclyde. I then finished that and thought I'll go back in for another year and did a master's in clinical and health psychology, also at Strathclyde. And I think that was the point where I kind of really learned a lot of the sort of core skills that I bring into this job. Just in really being able to demonstrate, being able to work with people alongside the sort of academic stuff around research and report writing and what you do in terms of communicating information in various formats. So that was the other kind of a related thing with that, is that there's something in the sort of a health policy intervention space and evaluating those that I think maps quite well over to some of the stuff that you can end up doing in government around kind of looking at a situation and the evidence base around that and kind of a developing understanding of it that you can then kind of share and build an evidence base out of kind of a work that's going on elsewhere. The one thing I would say about that is, while it was a really good avenue, I think, for me kind of academically, it was quite focused around the sort of a transition from doing your master's in clinical health psychology into a sort of a PhD or sort of a traditional assistant psychology, clinical psychology route, which was something I explored, but it didn't quite work out for me at that time for kind of all of the various reasons. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't feel like it was a kind of all that good a fit for kind of me and what I wanted to do. So in terms of kind of work experience for what I'd done prior, I'd worked in hospitality kind of all through uni, which was really quite good. I'd worked in kind of a kitchen, so it was I was quite comfortable with kind of a high pressure, fast paced environments. When I was doing my studies, I spent a bit of time working as a teaching assistant for the kind of a University of Strathclyde with things like, helping run tutorials and marking papers. After I had finished my master's, I kind of, for want of a better way to describe it, kicked about for a while before realising I had to get a proper job. I ended up working for a charity in the south side of Glasgow, doing support work for people with mental health issues, which was an absolutely fantastic job, and really kind of taught me, I think, a lot about how you kind of the skills you need to have in sort of dealing with people, and how important some of the stuff that at first seems quite mundane is around kind of a record keeping and note taking and things like that. Because when you're dealing with somebody that's got sort of serious mental health issues, knowing how they were doing this time last week or how they were doing 12 hours ago or 8 hours ago is a really big part of being able to understand what's kind of going on and where they're at as a person mentally. And that kind of helps to frame how you're going to carry out their care plan for any given day, and what's going to be reasonable and what's not. That was a really great job and I absolutely loved it, but the only problem with it was kind of a relief work on a part-time basis, so it wasn't quite a sustainable option for me. So I'd been kind of looking around and I found an advert for looking for assistant statisticians in the Scottish Government. So I applied for the assistant statistician recruitment process in 2019 because, as I just kind of said previously, I'd quite enjoyed doing psychology. The statistics component of it was something that I was quite interested in. I wish in hindsight I'd spent more time looking into it, but it was something that I was quite interested in and I was quite good at. I felt it would be a job that I quite enjoyed. So I went through the recruitment process for that, which is much like the social research process in that there's a sort of an interview and a test, and you have a sort of an assessment of your sort of a statistical skills. Went through that process, was successful, and I came in as an assistant statistician in August of 2019, and now kind of 2 years in, I'm looking to kind of get the next sort of a move up in the kind of a progression scale. Thinking about how my background in psychology kind of helped me to get to this point, as I've kind of touched on, overlap between the sort of public health sphere and policy making in general is quite a good introduction, I think, to kind of how policy formulation in that space works in a large part, in terms of kind of you have your evidence and you have your problem and you kind of look at developing solutions, trial and evaluate that solutions, and that whole sort of a policy making process is kind of good to understand, even at kind of a basic level. Other aspect of psychology that I think was really helpful was you get quite good, from my experience, in kind of explaining what's quite complex quite concisely. Really useful in psychology when you're trying to distill, theories that have been formulated and changed and tweaked over decades down into something that you can fit neatly in a paragraph or two in the introduction of an essay or report. So really good skill in government, because the one thing that is quite refreshing for me in government is that the writing style is quite different from when you're working as an academic. It's much more concise and much more shorter, and there's I think it can be a bit more direct, which can be quite refreshing. The focus on asking what does this mean in the context of psychology and sort of the psychological research is a good way of approaching challenges in government, because it's all about, X has happened, what does that mean for Y, and then what does that turn mean for Z. It's all about kind of understanding how one thing will impact on another and how that plays into the sort of a wider picture. There's been a great read across in terms of the skills I've picked up: report writing, reflective practice, data visualization, presenting, are all things that kind of mapped directly across to what I've done. in work and government. And yeah, working with people in the kind of a context of any sort of a psychological work or therapy or counselling is just great to be able to demonstrate, because we're really big on the kind of interpersonal skills here, because it's all about how you can build relationships and communicate and you know, just kind of get the message across to people. So 2 years in, kind of with some reflections from me, as kind of Nadine touched on, you know, there are people in government that have expertise in, you know, potato farming, which is actually very serious business. That genuinely is, look it up. They're through to, like, you know, fishery statistics, which are both incredibly technical fields, and there's really everything in between. And the scale of what goes on in between those two things is genuinely staggering, which means there's a lot to learn about, which, to be perfectly honest, can be a bit overwhelming when you first come in. I know it certainly was for me. Looking back, hard maths or stats, absolutely not a requirement. My background in psychology, not all that large a sort of a statistical or quantitative component. It's not really necessary. I think there's a real focus on having a diverse set of people and building the skills, rather than the expectation that you're going to come in with the ability to kind of carry out, you know, logistic regressions or any sort of a complicated statistical analysis. A lot of clever and qualified people you get to work alongside. A lot of people from academia that have kind of decided they wanted to change. It tends to be a pretty well educated set of colleagues that you get to work next to. A lot of variety in the work, from day to day and even from hour to hour, as kind of a priorities shift and change. A lot of ability to kind of direct where you want to take yourself in terms of what you learn, what skills you develop, and what, to get a realistic extent, kind of what work that you end up involved in. And it can be really exciting when some stuff that you're working on kind of gets picked up in the media or in various other places, and you can kind of get to kind of see stuff that you've worked on out in the sort of a wider world. So I will stop there. That's my pitch for being a statistician, and hand over to our policy officer. So Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming along today. So my name's Rachel, and I've worked as a policy officer in the government homelessness unit since April this year, so around 7 months now. I just thought I'd give a brief overview of my journey kind of into working for the Scottish Government. So I graduated from the University of Glasgow with a degree in psychology in 2016. To be honest, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do at all, but I knew that I wanted to work sort of in social justice and equality work. So I came across a graduate scheme called Charityworks, and if you could just move the slide forward, John, that'd be great. Working. There we go. Yeah, sorry, all my slides are basically just pictures because that's just how my brain works. But yeah, I applied for the graduate scheme Charityworks, and you can see the logo there. And it's a graduate scheme that links up graduates with a charity sector job, as well as providing a range of personal development and network opportunities. So I was really lucky to be placed with the charity called Who Cares Scotland, which does advocacy and campaigning work for care experienced children and young people. And a big part of the work is around influencing decision makers and policy makers to really improve things for children growing up in care and really reimagine the care system. And at the heart of the organisation is the voice of lived experience and people who have been through that system themselves. So my initial role there was as a business support and events officer. And what I would say about working in the charity sector is that you do end up wearing a lot of different hats and helping out across the organisation because resources are really tight in the third sector. But I think that's a great opportunity for a graduate because you get exposed to real depth of work and can take on a considerable amount of responsibility that you might not get in other maybe better resource organisations. So my role ranged from being a personal assistant to the CEO, organising events and supporting care experienced trainee staff members as well. And through the graduate programme, I met up with other trainees on a monthly basis down in London, which was all paid for by the graduate scheme. And we took part in learning sessions, and it was great because I now have a kind of network of like-minded people who I really rely on for peer support and advice, and I've made great friends from it. And after my year-long placement on the graduate scheme, I was then offered a permanent role at Who Cares, and I stayed on for a further year. And then after 2 years of working for the charity, I felt ready for a different challenge. So I moved to work for the National Lottery Community Fund as a funding officer. And some more photos there. And my role involved doing a lot of kind of outreach work in deprived communities to encourage local groups to apply for national lottery funding. And then my role was to assess those applications and make recommendations about whether to fund those projects or not to our committee who made the final decisions. And I'd say the best part of my job was getting out to visit all of the amazing projects that we funded. So for example, there's that picture there with me and the mini Shetland pony. So that was one of the projects that we funded, which was animal therapy down in Dumfries and Galloway. But it was great because I got exposure to a whole range of different projects and work, so ranging from charities that work with children with disabilities or environmental projects, projects that worked with elderly people, and it just gave me a real bird's eye view into the third sector. And it was interesting going from being on one side of receiving funding, working for a charity at Who Cares, to then being on the other side of helping to decide where that funding would make the biggest impact. And then because the National Lottery Community Fund is a non-departmental public body, it means that it is part of the public sector. So all of the internal vacancies for organisations like the Scottish Government and the wider civil service were advertised on a sort of website that I had access to. So the policy role that I'm in now came up on the website. So I applied for that earlier in the year, and then took up the job in April. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. There we go. Yeah, so really I think at this stage of my career, I'd worked for a charity and then I'd worked within funding, but I was starting to understand the range of kind of systemic issues at play in society that contribute to inequality. And then I made the decision that I wanted to work for government to try and help improve things on a national scale to really create real system change and a lasting positive difference. So yeah, started this job earlier in the year and I've really enjoyed it so far. It's quite a varied job. A big part of it is liaising directly with frontline services, which tend to be third sector organisations who are commissioned to support people at the sharpest end of homelessness, so people who are rough sleeping. And thankfully in Scotland, the number of rough sleepers is quite low, and everybody who is rough sleeping is always offered accommodation, but they may not take up for whatever reason, for example, because of past trauma. And another part of my role is gathering data and analysing research to inform our national policies on ending rough sleeping. And a key part is delivering the relevant actions that are set out in our Ending Homelessness Together plan, which is the sort of guiding document for all of our work in the homelessness unit, and that was put together with a whole range of different stakeholders. And another part of the role is providing briefings, advice and support to ministers. So recently I've just put a tweet there from Shona Robison. So I supported Shona Robison, who is currently the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Housing and Local Government, on a visit to the Simon community, which is a charity that has an access hub in Glasgow that support people at risk or who are currently experiencing homelessness. So I assisted her to that visit, and it was really great to see the work that was going on the ground and see the real difference it's making to people's lives. So it is a really varied job, and it's really important work that we do in the policy unit. I'm really enjoying it so far. And that's just a really quick kind of whistle-stop tour of my journey. I just thought I'd end with a few tips, I guess, I would have appreciated hearing when I was at your stage in life. So the first is really about just making the most of opportunities while you're at university. So try and get involved in societies, and volunteering is a really great way to try out different things and see what you enjoy, and means that you can contribute to helping out in your community, and reach out to your careers advisors, tap into that resource while you're still at university. Secondly, think about transferable skills. So for example, I worked as a camp counsellor in America and one of the summers at university, and although I haven't gone into working directly with children now, I still gain so many skills from that experience, like leadership skills and communication skills and adapting to new environments, which has helped me in all of the roles that I've had since leaving university. So yeah, really think about the different experiences that you can take and how you can use those skills later on in life as well. And just lastly, don't feel pressured to have everything figured out at the moment. You know, as I said at the start of my presentation, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And as you can see, I've jumped around a few different organisations, but looking back, I think I've taken a lot from each experience, and I'd like to think I'm a better kind of civil servant from having all that various experience. So yeah, that's me, and I hope that's been useful. And I'll hand back over to John now, and I think we're going to move on to the Q&A part.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So yeah, I think that kind of concludes each of our sort of individual presentations. I'm happy to kind of open the floor up for questions, so please do feel free to kind of chip in or put any questions you may have in the chat bar, and we'll kind of work our way through them. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. That was really good. So I'm going to stop the recording so students can unmute and ask questions, or you can use the chat function asking your questions.